there's a lot of issues that we need to look at to address this core and very good question that the presenters have given us. What do we have to do to get to a point where clean energy is conventional? And we know our current system very well, and that involves digging up a lot of fossil fuels out of the ground, converting those to energy, creating a lot of waste byproducts, many of which go into our atmosphere. Now, there are a lot of things we've got to address, which you'll hear from other speakers, including technology and policies. But one thing that I want to focus on are the political battles, because I think the other problems pale in comparison. And what we see, especially in the last couple or 3 years, is that the fossil fuel industry has become very politically empowered, very politically active, and they've really ramped up their game quite a bit. And one of the biggest obstacles we face is the lobby power, the intellectual infrastructure that they've built over the years, and the political activity and electoral activities of these companies. And I've just shown a few here who have been active. These were some of the most active companies fighting the climate bill that we saw in 2008 and 2009. And this activity now continues at the state levels, at local levels, and at the federal level. And we see at the state level here in Wisconsin that they successfully did repeal to some degree the Focus on Energy program. We held that off. We saw efforts to repeal wind power siting laws and replace them with very restrictive laws here in Wisconsin, which we held off, and that was a great victory. And then we also see around the country efforts now to roll back the renewable electricity standards that create markets in many states around the country as well. And new initiatives are facing even stronger pushback with the money that flows to the Tea Party and so forth. And it's not limited to climate legislation or renewable energy legislation, but even basic common sense clean air legislation that reduces our healthcare cost. And of course, energy battles are nothing new. You can go back 100 years in this country, and one of my favorite examples was the Teapot Dome oil scandal. And that was just a kind of a primitive influence peddling scandal from the 1920s, which involved some sweetheart deals for a couple of oil companies to get oil leases under the Teapot Dome. And I want to point out that Wisconsin's Fighting Bob LaFollette played a key role in blowing the lid off of the Teapot Dome oil leases. And what came out of that was new rules in terms of lobbying influence and also for public information. But since then, we've seen a number of other battles. In the early 1900s, fights over rates and over monopoly power from the new utilities that we had, and that power was constrained, and we did reach some balance for some time in our country. And then we've also seen more recent decades, the fight over technology with nuclear power battles, with access to the grid for renewable energy in the 1970s. And in the 1990s, we really had a head of steam built up. We were working on least cost planning, reducing all the costs, not just financial costs for consumers, but also social and health costs. And then that was stomped out with the deregulation drive that came back, the reaction from the fossil fuel interest. And now today we've got the real big issue of global warming and climate change we've got to deal with. But now things are really different. In our lifetime, certainly in mine, I just passed 50 recently, we've never seen anything like this. And what we've seen is due to decisions by a partisan U.S. Supreme Court, by lax enforcement of remaining campaign finance laws, that the wealthy have gotten more power than since the Gilded Age. And we're in a new Gilded Age, which might be even more dangerous than the last one. And I just put a few examples up here. We've got the famous Koch brothers, David and Charles Koch. We've got Richard DeVos from the Amway Corporation, Mr. Sheldon, who's a gambling mogul, and then we also have Diane Hendricks, who became very famous recently in Wisconsin with ABC Supply, trying to help Scott Walker purchase an election, and they succeeded. And they don't all share energy issues, and that's an important lesson for us to take away. They're not limited within their issue silos. Now, the Koch brothers mainly care about energy issues, and because most of their wealth comes from energy, but they're willing to also support other efforts on culture war efforts which DeVos might back, or in bashing unions and so forth. This is a very real situation in our body politic we've got to face up to. And of course, it happens when our stakes are higher than ever. When global warming is happening, when global warming effects are accelerating, and when the need for us to take action is more important and stronger than ever. And so for that reason, we need to redouble our efforts. And we've seen, just in 2 years, we've seen the fruits of their efforts. Renewable incentives have fallen back. Focus on energy, I mentioned, the production tax credit at the federal level lapsed, and there's no renewal in sight. It could be perhaps terminated for good. Renewable electricity standards, already mentioned, in many states are under attack, and there is a new campaign gearing up. And if anybody ever questions, does public policy really make any difference? All this politics, all this policy? Exhibit A is that these wealthy people who are not known for foolishly giving money away are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these campaigns to rein in policies. And frankly, it is flattering to the renewable energy industry to be taken so seriously by the fossil fuel industry. I think for a number of years they're like, yeah, a bunch of hippies, gathering Custer, wherever, around the country. But now, we're really taking market share away from them. And it even extends to biofuels and pushing back on biofuels, in which case they're taking on the agricultural sector. Of course, while all this is happening, while you've got the big drive for austerity in the US and abroad to cut back on renewables, to cut back on protecting the environment, to cut back on the social safety net for seniors and the poor, fossil fuel subsidies are a sacred cow, and they are sacrosanct. So we need to adapt. We need to continuously adapt our policies and our politics and our approach to our advocacy. And our goal is for the advocacy is to change the political will of the country away from the old, dirty fossil fuels of the past and to rebuild. We used to be a bipartisan support for renewable energy that we used to enjoy. I've worked for Republicans, I've worked for Democrats, and it used to be a very bipartisan issue that had strong support. We also need to stand our ground and speak our beliefs. The environmental community had for years, and I think we're finally turning away from this, actually run away from things like saying climate change, saying global warming, because those are controversial words. We started saying green jobs, and guess what? That became targeted language. And now, we could run away from that, but we're not doing that. We also need to build power independent of the electoral system and not seek all the actions at the ballot box. Some do, but movements can also die there. What we also have to do is to realize, well, if corporations are going to step up their political activity, if they're going to become more political players, then they need to be treated as political players. And we need to apply pressure on the corporations, perhaps even cutting out the middleman, the politician, and taking the pressure and applying it to the power. And one example is the Wisconsin Realtors Association here in Wisconsin, which has really kind of blatantly come out against wind power over the past 2 years. And we stood up to them, we held them back, but they're really trying to basically put a privatized toll gate in wind power, have strict siting standards unless you pay a realtor to sign an agreement, and then you can build your wind farm. And so we need to hold the corporations accountable directly. They invest a lot of money in the goodwill and marketing for their corporate name, and for the worst actors, we've got to hold them to account publicly on that. And we have got to look internally in terms of how we conduct ourselves with our advocacy and politically. And one phrase that's recently come to mind for me in the past couple of years is that we need a better political math. We need to emphasize addition and multiplication over division and subtraction. And while it's easier to splinter and form smaller groups and to go your own way, and I certainly know how that is, we have more power and we can do more, as we have shown many times through the growth of renewable energy, when we work together, when we add, when we grow our numbers, when we multiply. So we can do this. We can continue the growth. We can continue to build on the technology advances and the innovation of the renewable energy industry. And to do that, we've got to adapt to the new realities. We've got to adjust our own practices, and we've got to continue to work together and unite. Thank you very much.